You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting-edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Business Wealth Impact. Today, we have a wonderful guest, Dr. Stefanie Milam, who is a NASA scientist and also the James Webb Space Telescope Project scientist for policy and science community, where she's helped enable observations within our own solar systems from near-Earth asteroids to the farthest reaches of the Kuiper belt and even the brightest objects in the infrared sky, such as Mars. Her expertise is in the compositional studies of primitive bodies, namely comets, and uses ground and space-based facilities to understand their connection to the formation and evolution of planetary systems. Welcome, Stefanie.
Thanks so much for having me today.
Oh, it's awesome. I'm so excited because I'm a bit of a nerd with all the space stuff. So tell me, I love all that you're doing, and I was really super excited to have you on the show. And I wanted to ask you, what is important about all this? Because that's a really good question. Why is this work that you're doing important?
So astronomers in general are seeking questions that humankind has had for all of existence. Are we alone? What's really out there? The sense of discovery of finding another world that's something like what we have here on Earth or anything in our solar system. How did it come to be? How did galaxies start forming? Is there life out there? These are huge questions that we've been striving to answer. And every time we have new technology and new capabilities to search our sky, we find new and amazing things that are happening not only in our own solar system, but in other planetary systems or in the universe around us. And it only opens the door for more questions, of course.
Okay, so what is the mission of this project?
So the James Webb Space Telescope is an infrared space telescope. So it is considered to be the successor of the Hubble Space Telescope, but it's not quite the same as Hubble. Hubble operates mostly at visible light wavelengths with some ultraviolet capabilities. So mostly the light that we can see with our own eyes. The James Webb Space Telescope sees at longer wavelengths. So something like snakes can see when they're looking for their prey at night. The thermal radiation is what we're really looking for. So we have a really powerful infrared telescope that we're looking for the first stars and galaxies that formed in our universe after the Big Bang. So we have to look at these tiny little heat signals of these very far distant objects and try to see how did they come to be? When did they start forming? And, how have they evolved throughout time? But also we're studying planets around other stars. And we're trying to find out if there's another planet out there orbiting a different star that has something that looks like Earth or something that we know in our own solar system. Do they have an atmosphere? Are there terrestrial planets with atmospheres out there? Or are they all these giant Jupiters or frozen planets like Uranus or Neptune? And so we're really starting to get some very unique insight into what these other planets are all around our own universe.
Okay, so you're saying this telescope is so powerful you can see from Earth all the way to the surface of Mars with the infrared.
Of course. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So we can see Mars with an infrared telescope. We've been doing this with ground-based telescopes, but the James Webb Space Telescope can see things that we can't see from the ground. That's because our atmosphere absorbs a lot of the things that we really want to look for in other planets, for example. So if we're looking for Earth 2.0, we want to see if it has water in its atmosphere or carbon monoxide or methane. Well, all of those things are in our own atmosphere. So when we try to look for them outside of Earth, it's very challenging for us to do. So putting a telescope in space gives us the opportunity to look for the things that are in our own atmosphere.
Okay, so what are some things that have happened? Because usually there's surprises and unexpected stuff. When we're looking for something, we find something else. So what are some of those things that have surprised you or that you've stumbled upon while looking for other things?
Well, some of them we have designed an experiment to look for certain things,
Mm-hmm.
and some of those include searching for the most distant galaxies.
Mm-hmm.
And we have so far found the most distant galaxy to date. It is part of a large program that was designed to study the distant universe. And this has what we call a redshift of 14, which is the groundbreaker. What
Mm.
this means is that this galaxy actually formed only 290 million years after the Big Bang. So we're
Mm.
really looking at the universe in its sort of toddler years now,
Mm-hmm.
whereas Hubble could only see back to like the teenage years of the universe. So we're
Wow.
really starting to see these early galaxies that formed right after the Big Bang. So the surprising part about these early galaxies is one that we're able to detect them now, but they're bigger and brighter than we expected. And there's a lot more of them than we actually expected.
Mm.
We haven't quite broken cosmology yet because it turns out they're so bright and being so distant, far away from us, because of their black holes, which are actually kind of lighting them up.
Mm.
So we still have the mystery of how many there are. We didn't expect there to be so many, but we're starting to now come to the conclusions of why they're bright. So now it's just a matter of numbers.
Wow. So, how far you're saying this telescope can see into other galaxies?
Yes, yes. So well beyond
Okay.
our solar system.
Wow. So, how far is that actually?
So to reach the edge of our solar system, to go beyond the edge of our own galaxy, the Milky Way, to go beyond our local group where we have our own cluster of galaxies that have formed. You have to go beyond the bubble, you have to go well into the distant universe, all the way back to the beginning. So this is hundreds of thousands of light years. So we're really pushing, sort of the stretch of time is, or as the universe is expanding, it's kind of getting further and further away from us and beyond our grasp at some times. But we're really starting to achieve some of these and seeing those very first galaxies.
So, is this the first telescope that has been able to see this far?
Yes. So we've mapped the actual radiation from the Big Bang, known as the cosmic microwave background. But after the Big Bang occurred and all of the energy was lost, there was this chaotic period where it was basically plasma. And after all of that sort of settled and things started to coalesce, you started getting globs. Those globs started becoming the first stars and the first galaxies. That is what we're finally starting to achieve. We're finally starting to see those. I say see, they're infrared light, but
Hmm.
they were actually emitting visible light and ultraviolet light. It's just now been stretched because the universe is expanding, so it stretches the light and it's pulled it to longer and longer wavelengths. So that's why we have to use an infrared telescope to study them
Mm.
because it's light that Hubble could no longer see.
Incredible. So, how many other galaxies have you identified outside of our bubble?
Oh, hundreds of thousands. We've known and studied galaxies for a very long time. Yeah.
Wow. And so, how long has it been since you've seen these new galaxies?
So the earliest galaxies, like the one that I just said that we broke the record on the most distant, this was actually discovered within the first 2 years of our science operations. So we have now
Hmm.
been operating the Space Telescope for 2 years. And these observations occurred within the first year. So it's
Wow.
taken quite a bit of time to actually not only find these objects in their huge fields of view, and saying, oh, that one looks really interesting. It's really, really red. So maybe that means it's pulled to longer and longer wavelengths. Um, so they are candidate distant galaxies at that point.
Hmm.
And then we have to go in and actually look at them with an instrument called a spectrometer,
Hmm.
where we can see if the light is actually shifted to the longer part of the spectrum, telling us how old and confirming how old those galaxies
Mm.
actually are. So that took follow up observations over the next year to basically confirm how distant these galaxies actually are. And there's a number of candidates, and they're constantly, trying to push and break their record, even within their own team, seeing who can actually achieve the most distant galaxy. So it's kind of a fun race.
You have a bunch of teams working together on this?
Yeah, there's a bunch of teams working together. There's a bunch of teams competing with one another. Who's going to get the most distant galaxy that JWST will ever detect? And only time will tell.
I have to laugh when you said it took so long, a year. We're talking about light years. And you said it took, I thought, what, a year? That's nothing in anybody's time. So so this is big news that in the last 2 years, the first time people have ever seen distant galaxies happen in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, how does it present itself in the telescope? Just by light? Or you can actually, how do you know these are distant galaxies?
So the process starts as we take pictures. We take beautiful pictures the same way Hubble does. So we look at a part of the sky where a lot of the dust from our solar system isn't really blocking a lot of the light. And so we look in these sort of clear areas of the sky and we stare at them and we take images. We have a fantastic camera where we take these beautiful images of the sky. And so they take images of these sort of fields of distant galaxies, and they know where some of those are, and sometimes we don't. And they sit and stare. We get the data down, and they look at these images, and they see all the little red dots that are scattered about the image. And sometimes there's stars, sometimes there's other close nearby galaxies. And they're really fantastic and beautiful fields. But they look at these tiny little red specks, and then they start doing things like playing with so the cameras have different filters on them. So we can look at different colors and seeing where they are the brightest. So if they're brighter at wavelengths that are much longer, that means that they're further away. And so those are now the candidate galaxies for being very distant. So then we follow up with observations with a spectrometer and see how the light has actually shifted and confirm how far away. Sometimes they're not far at all. Sometimes the red and extreme color actually comes from dust and other gas that's actually just a lot of stars that are now being born, causing this galaxy to look like a distant galaxy. So they can be deceiving.
That's fascinating. So what got you into all this? What's your story with all this?
I grew up in Houston, Texas. And when I was a little girl, I had a school field trip. I think I was about 6 years old, down to Johnson Space Center. Now, this is in the prime of, the space shuttle, and the astronauts were constantly training in their facilities down there. You got to see rockets. You got to eat astronaut ice cream, some of the greatest things for little kids. And I came home just absolutely enlightened. And I told my mom, when I grow up, I'm going to work for NASA or I'm going to be a ballerina. So everything I did sort of from that phase on was, how can I become an astronaut? How can I work for NASA? And focusing on sciences and math and trying to get myself in the best competitive, sort of path that I could actually pursue a career as a scientist. And that's what I've done since I was a little girl.
Ended up being a NASA scientist. So there you go. It happened.
Here I am.
It happened. Okay. So what do you feel? I mean, all this is super interesting, right? It's, geek material. But what do you feel is the impact of all this studying and discovery?
So one of the areas that we're really kind of revolutionizing with this telescope and the impact that it has on humanity is studying planets around other stars. So we're looking at other planetary systems, sometimes like our own solar systems, but oftentimes not. And we're looking at these planets, trying to see if they look anything like any of the planets that we know here in our own solar system. And most importantly, if there's anything that looks like it has an atmosphere that would support life. We can't necessarily detect life, but we're looking for something that we know life needs. that's a bit biased. We only have an instance of one of knowing where life is and how it exists. So there might be other types of life forms, they might have other dependencies, but we have to start somewhere.
Mm.
So we're looking for planets, terrestrial planets, that have an atmosphere so that it can basically have a temperature that things can live in,
Mm-hmm.
and not extremes. If you didn't have an atmosphere, you can change by a couple hundred degrees from night to day. So we know we need something that's a little more thermally stable. And we're looking to see if these atmospheres have water in them, if there's carbon species like
Mm.
carbon monoxide or methane or carbon dioxide, whether or not there's ozone in these atmospheres,
Mm.
or anything else. And this is really what's going to give us the insight and give us the short list of the planets that we think are really interesting. So then we build bigger and better telescopes in the future and we try to study them even more. And if they're close enough, maybe someday we send something there.
Okay. So you're going to other galaxies. Why are you not? Are you also concentrating on our actual galaxy? Or
So
you've already, exhausted all those attempts?
no, no, no. So planets we're actually studying within our own galaxy. So just beyond our solar system, we're looking at our closest star system and
Hmm.
trying to see whether or not there are planets there and what they may or may not look like.
Hmm.
All of this is really compelling because we knew our planetary system, our solar system, formed from a region that multiple planetary systems actually formed from.
Hmm.
So, if everything follows the same sort of evolutionary sequence, that means maybe the ingredients that made our solar system also made these other planetary systems.
Mm.
And if they evolved in any way, shape, or form, like our own solar system, that gives us a clue that maybe they do have the right ingredients to form something that's habitable or could support life.
Mm. Okay, so I was just thinking as you were speaking. So you're talking about the Big Bang and all of that. Are any of the people like are they faith based? I'm just curious. Do you know what I mean? How does that
Yes,
fit
we
in?
do.
Do you know what I mean? The
Yeah,
Big Bang, but the creation of the world. Do you know what I mean?
absolutely.
Yeah.
I work with a number of astronomers and astrophysicists and planetary scientists that all have faith, be it Christian,
Hmm.
Hindu, whatever their beliefs are. And that's not always surprising
Hmm.
because if you ever get the opportunity to look into a telescope, it is just absolutely astonishing how much is out there,
Mm.
how big space is.
Mm.
How did it all come to be? How did it all start? How did all, everything evolve to the right state such that we could exist here on Earth?
Mm.
And how do we find out how that all happened? And sometimes there's questions that we just can't answer.
Mm.
And sometimes it doesn't need to be answered.
Hmm.
But, this is what we have questions about. We've always had questions like this.
Mm.
But it is an infinite beauty. And there are a lot of scientists that I work with in multiple fields that have faith. So
Right.
it is not out of the question.
No, but they would then have to find a solution of the Big Bang fitting in with the creation of the world by God, right?
Right. Yeah. So there's these other questions that maybe the timelines are different. Maybe
Hmm.
there's things that aren't set in stone.
Hmm.
Um, but that doesn't mean that you don't have faith and you don't
Mm.
have unanswered bigger questions
Right.
that perhaps may be a faith based sort of system
Right. Right.
versus
I mean, one thing's for sure is we don't know a lot. And when we try to explain everything, there's no way we could explain everything because there's
absolutely.
an infinite number of questions that are unanswered in our lives. So clearly we don't know everything, but it's good you're on the search. So once, let's say you do find, a planet, has life. What does that mean for us? That we're going to send people there and explore? I mean, I know that Elon Musk wants us all to go live on Mars, but how can we? Like,
Yeah.
what is the scientific community regarding, the space community think about all that? How could we possibly? I was thinking the other day, how can we possibly live on Mars without? You couldn't just go out. You'd have to have like a fake kind of atmosphere set up. How could you do that even? So, what do you all think about that?
So I think we're still fairly far from finding actual life.
Mm,
The instrumentation that we have is giving us clues to whether a planet or moon in our own solar system or otherwise has ingredients that are enough to make us think it could sustain something like
mm,
life. Could we go there and try to exist on
mm,
that body?
mhm.
That's what I'm talking about as far as habitability,
Yes.
whether or not we think that life as we know it could potentially live there. And
Mm,
there's all kinds of other things that are going to be factors into this,
mhm,
but we're not looking for, living, breathing beings at this time
mm,
as far as planets outside of our own solar system. That's a
mhm,
whole different area within our own solar system, including searches for life on Mars, on
mhm,
Venus, on our moon, and these now ocean worlds that are around Jupiter and Saturn.
mhm,
So there's a lot of really intriguing areas that we want to send probes to see if we can
mm,
find things like microbial life or
mm.
otherwise. But when we're talking about planets outside of our solar system, we're quite far from that because we can't
Right.
send a probe there yet.
No.
Um, and so whether or not we can get there at some
Mhm,
point in time, that's a challenge. That's been a
mhm,
challenge for all of the space industry for
mhm.
years. And trying to think of creative ways of how we could get beyond our solar system and send something to probe or go and see what's going on out
Right.
there.
Right. Because I was thinking, even the worst life on Earth would be better than the best life on Mars. So is that, I mean, there's this thing of let's send people to live. I wouldn't want to live on Mars. And as I said, I mean, what would have to happen for people to live on Mars? Like, what would they have to do to make that habitable by human beings?
I mean, that's a whole area of study and research.
Mm,
We're trying to bring samples back from Mars eventually, hopefully,
mm-hmm,
that we can then study the soil. We can study what type of minerals are
mm-hmm,
there. What could we potentially um, use to help terraform
mm,
or create a sustainable environment?
mm-hmm,
There isn't an atmosphere, so well, there's a very tenuous atmosphere.
mm-hmm.
So we'd have to figure out how to sustain that. As you said, you can't just walk outside and, take a big deep breath of, the morning air and have your coffee. And
Yes.
so, there would have to be some environmental things that would have to be implemented. And could that be self sustaining? And how would that be done? I remember in grade school, NASA had a challenge for students to design a space station
Mhm,
or something that we could live on in other environments, and we had to think about all these little things like how would we get from one building to
mhm,
another. Do we have to just build a giant bubble and live in a bubble,
mhm,
or do you have like tubes, and how do you do all
mhm.
that? And I remember it was such a fun project because you have to really start thinking about these things like where are you
Right.
going to get water from, how are you going
Exactly.
to recycle water, um, if there's no atmosphere, how are you going to grow things? How can you sustain a lifelike environment?
Right.
And
Right.
then there's the whole other question of if there is life there that maybe we just
Mhm.
haven't found yet, how would us being there impact that environment for them? And would
Exactly.
we, are we the kudzu now of Mars
Yes.
or the
Yes.
spotted lanternfly or pick your
Mhm.
favorite? Um, and what's the impact of that and what does that mean
Mm.
for the future of
Mhm.
science and research or that planet or
Right.
um, so these are some big fundamental
Some
questions that
huge,
we
huge
have to start
questions.
thinking about.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was just, puzzled as to this idea of getting people to live on Mars. Like, why? Just let's fix conditions here. All right. Well, Stephanie, this has been amazing. Thank you for joining us. So, what's one thing you'd like to leave the listeners with as far as philosophy or mindset about, your life and work?
I think it's exploration in general, figuring out what the unknown unknowns are.
Hmm.
Every time we look, we find something new and it opens the door for new questions and new things that we want to discover or follow up
Hmm.
on or challenges of how can we study this better.
Hmm.
And I think that's the most exciting part about working on a project like this is yeah, we've designed a mission to do very specific types of science,
Hmm.
But sometimes it's the things that you don't expect that are the most rewarding and the most exciting results. This
Mhm.
is where the Nobel Prize comes from. This is how, science actually grows, and how we learn more about how we got here, how we came to be, and whether there's potential for anything like us in
Mm.
this vast universe.
Mm. Okay, well, that's a beautiful thing to end on. Thank you so much for turning up. And also, thank you to the listeners. Please keep tuning in and subscribing and sharing if you like the show. You're listening to the Business Wealth Impact Podcast, your source for empowering information and cutting edge ideas from the world's top minds. I'm your host, Jeanne Amlour, founder of seven-figure coaching company, Jeanne Amlour International. Join me on a journey to unleash your potential and create your highest success. Welcome to Business Wealth Impact.